Hello, everyone. Welcome to King of Our Nightmares. We're jumping back onto the Bachman train with The Long Walk, or what is it called in German?
In German, it's called Todesmarsch, which means death march, which is
That's
accurate
accurate.
enough.
And what was the stand called? We forgot to talk about that in the last episode.
The Stand, famously, is called The Stand, The Last Stand. That's up there with the Star Wars novel Shadow Games, In the Shadows, where they just keep the English title and then basically translate it as a subtitle.
All right. So, The Long Walk's fascinating because it was King's first novel. Wrote it when he was 18. He tried to get it published. It got denied. He was embarrassed and shelved it. And it wouldn't be till after the stand that it would get released under the Bachman moniker, the pseudonym that he wrote under for a long time because he was writing too many books, which now they wouldn't even bother with that. But it fits in the Bachman it fits as a Richard Bachman book, where the Bachman books are pretty down. They're very downtrodden books. Um, Also, this is loose. It's an allegory for Vietnam in a lot of ways. It's also a parody of JFK used to have these like walks for health thing.
Hmm.
So it's a play on that. Essentially, the long walk is about a guy named Garrity,
Ray Garrity,
Ray
right?
Garrity. Um, he signed up to do the long walk, and he's at 16, I do believe. There's a bunch of these kids. They range from 13 to 17, 17 or 18. Like, and they basically, the US has kind of become a military regime. And once a year, they have these young men, boys basically, walk from the Canadian border down to potentially, I guess, Florida. Although it's never gone that far, and they are forced to walk at about 4 miles an hour. They can't stop to pee, eat, shit. They can't do any of that. If they're stopped, they get three. If they stop, they get three warnings and then are killed. And it is every detail of what a forced march would be like.
Mm-hmm.
It is miserable in the best way possible. Um, Honestly, this was a breath of fresh air after reading The Stand. The
I
first
believe it.
Stand. I read this in I think 2 days. It's a very fast paced read. It's one of your favorites, if I'm not mistaken.
It is maybe my favorite of the Bagman books. It's definitely one of my favorite King books, like
Mhm.
of all time. Maybe even just books of all time. This one really works for me.
It works for me too, and I believe that all YA fiction owes The Long Walk. Like Hunger Games, Divergent, they all owe their creativity to The Long Walk. In fact, this is a popular one for teens to read,
Makes sense.
and it doesn't feel like a YA
Mhm.
at all. It's not. It is a very nihilistic view of what the US could be. And it kind of predicts the reality TV trend. This and Running Man. Running Man,
Oh
when
yeah,
we get to that, is also
they have
kind
they
of
have a very similar-ish like premise and tone in a way.
Mhm.
Both are basically like dystopian futures.
Yes. And both involve television.
Yeah. Running Man is going to be interesting when we get to it because that book takes place in 2025, the far distant future.
Yeah. Although the Hummer did come back. But I digress. Um this it's one of my favorites of King's work. It's the most refreshing.
Hmm.
I
It's
think
something drastically different from the previous 70s books.
well, I mean, it was written probably in the 60s,
Yeah.
right at the height of Vietnam. And it's basically like these guys just forced to walk and how they interact with one another. And one of them's just an asshole. The others, like, some of them go insane. One has like a seizure and he ends up getting shot.
And that's just such a great part of the book. You get
Mhm.
Ray Garrity as the main character. We
Mhm.
follow him through the entire book. And we get introduced to all the other contestants because it's like 100 young boys.
Yes, there's
Yeah.
100 of them.
So he interacts with many of them. He forms rivalries and friendships.
Mhm.
And then we get over the 300 pages something that this book is, fast paced. We get all the characters, the interactions, and we know every single one of them is gonna die.
Mhm.
And it's still like gut wrenching every time.
Yeah, and some of the best ones are like people we never interacted with, and you hear the gunshot,
Yeah.
and someone has punched their ticket. That's what they keep saying. Punch their ticket. And just the amount of people watching them,
On the sidelines, watching and
s-
holding up like signs. Yeah.
and I mean, Garrity at the beginning makes out with a girl
Oh, yeah.
that isn't his girlfriend, and then feels bad for a while. But he was going to punch his ticket. He gets a warning. And the thing is, like, the warnings go away after a while if you've been, consistent. But I mean, they don't get to sleep, they don't get to rest. They're out there for days. And it's just, it rains on them at one point. It's really hot at another point.
Yeah. And besides them, there's like this military vehicle. I don't remember exactly what it was. Something futuristic, I think.
Yeah.
And they get like army soldiers come running up to them. They give them water and food every now and then.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
There's the less we say about The Long Walk, the better, because it's a very short book.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really, really good. It's brutal, though. We talked about some brutal things in The Stand, but the overall tone of Long Walk is brutal. It's basically anything you could think of bad happening if you were forced to march somewhere does happen.
Yeah. And I think this book really cemented for me, like, I like Bagman books more than King. In a way. Because Rage was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting premise, quick read.
Yeah.
But The Long Walk, you wouldn't guess that's King's first written book. That's so goddamn good. And I think that ties into what you say, that like young people especially like this one.
Mm-hmm.
Probably because he wrote it when he himself was young, and it's mostly about people his age, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah, and refreshing, especially after The Stand, to have something. It's a simple concept, but it's taken to an extreme. And this is the second one of these where there is no film adaptation of The Long Walk yet. I know there's allegedly someone's working on one.
Yeah. You know what is a shame? You know who had the rights? Apparently, I might be misremembering, but
Frank Darabont.
It was Frank Darabont, and then he lost.
That could have been really good.
That could have been so awesome. He would have been the best person to adapt this.
Yeah, but people hated The Mist when it came out. It's a
Yeah,
shame.
which is a shame.
We'll talk about that when we review Skeleton Crew.
But it's weird this didn't get a film adaptation, especially not. What was the time, like the Hive, the fucking YA adaptations? Hunger Games. You got
the early 2010s.
Yeah, I'm surprised they didn't just say, "Oh my god, look, we got a Stephen King property." Just
it's too brutal.
Quickly.
That's why they would try to make it PG-13. This can't be. In fact, I'd argue it'd be hard to make this an R.
Hmm.
This could be easily become NC-17 because they're teens, they're kids,
Right.
and that. I mean, now we live in a time where a lot of things just get an R rating. That might be one that pushes it.
I guess it depends how you show their death.
Yeah, you'd have to get clever. You couldn't be nearly as graphic, but there are ways around that in film to show the brutality.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, some of them I don't exactly remember if it was like this, but some of them we don't see
Yeah.
dying, but we hear like the gunshot and stuff.
Oh
and
yeah.
you can do
yeah.
stuff
and
like
the
that.
night.
Yeah.
In the middle of the night, you'll hear the they'll be walking, you hear it, and it's like someone punched their ticket, and you can't even tell.
Mhm.
But yeah. Stupid dog. Yeah, it's a good one. It's well worth your time to read this.
Mhm. And this
Highly recommended.
highly. One of the best Bagman books, maybe the absolute best,
Mhm.
but definitely above Rage.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
Rage is wonky. Easier to get than Rage.
Yeah.
Good
Thankfully-
audiobook. That's something I should mention.
Hmm.
Stupid dog. It's not even a dog that lives here. It's like my neighbor's girlfriend's dog. But he freaks out. He looks into my window and barks at me. I've never had a dog that has barked at me when I'm inside the house. But anyway, closing thoughts?
Just that it's a great book, a
Mhm.
short and quick read, and that's most of the Bagman books, which is why I also think they are better. They are more to the point, they
Mhm.
are psychological,
Mhm.
and they just work, and they have this depressing, dark atmosphere, and it just works.
Yeah.
It's just a fun read, so to speak.
Fun. It's well worth your time. So,
Mhm.
anyway, next episode, we close out the 70s with The Dead Zone. Thank you all for tuning in.